I really do believe regularized engagement for leaders in higher education is critically important. I often say that 30% of my time, 40% of my time is engaged with students. Many people will say, Tom, you're at this level, you work for the president, you're spending 30% of your time with students. I live in a residence hall with students. Who at my level does that? But I think it makes a difference. I'm a sociologist of sorts, right? I see what's happening, when I go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning. I look around, I see the campus at night, I hear what's happening. I go to events.
That was Tom Ellett, who's the CXO or Chief Experience Officer at Quinnipiac University, I think higher ed's first CXO. And he returns to the pod to talk about student experience. And we had a great conversation about feedback and building relationships, whether it's students or faculty or parents or counselors or employers, and how that feedback fuels a better and better student experience and helps you build relationships with all the folks you have to partner with to enable student success and a great student experience. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Welcome, Tom. I'm so excited to talk to one of the few and the first CXO in higher ed. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in student experience.
Thank you so much, Elliot. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share some of my journey. And I think that will be a through line through this conversation about the journeys, student journeys, staff and faculty journeys, parents' journeys, all of those folks who contribute to the success of students. Pretty briefly, when I think about your question about myself, I certainly grew up through student affairs roles, first generation college student, and attended community college and a 4-year private institution, had the ability to receive a PhD. But the two things that I think in terms of my journey that really has me thinking about student experience are two particular things I decided to do. One was receiving my MFA in directing a theater. And that was really formative for me as I thought about the process of a play being performed. We work towards opening night, right? And so bringing together a group of actors who are excited to explore a play, a written piece of work, and for them to understand deeply about the characters and the conflict and the motivation and all of those things really helped me think about students.
Sounds a lot like life.
It is. The through line of character development, right, is finding your motivation for what I do on stage. Very similar to help students find their motivation for what it is they want to do. So that was one. And the second one, which is very similar, was something we've talked about is coaching and receiving my coaching certification. And through that process, really listening deeply for opportunity, the client giving, what opportunity they're thinking about, and trying to deepen action. And I look at every conversation I have with a student or a parent or a staff member similarly, that I'm blessed to be brought into the conversation and to really listen for opportunity. And so that has been really two formative pieces for me as I think about the skills that I've tried to hone in on in this role and the outcomes that I think are similarly aligned for all three experiences.
I love the idea that you're coaching people through like the theater of life and understanding like characters and conflict and kind of helping them along their journey and, understanding themselves and their place in the world. Good stuff. I'm curious, how do you define with student experience as such a cross-cutting kind of thing? It's hard to say what's not student experience, but like, how do you define it? What is student experience?
it goes back to that coaching, the directing piece, helping students to realize potential through intentional engagement, intentional reflection, and intentional support. I think all three of those things are really cornerstones for the college journey, the college experience, different than the journey at an amusement park like Disney or some kind of journey that might be offered, hospitals experience. This is specific to the client, the consumer, in this case, the student.
So their success is kind of defined by the degree to which they can realize their potential. And the college or the university's job is to help them, realize their potential kind of in both senses of the word, like realize, like know what it is, but then like realize in terms of make it happen.
It's also important, as I have seen adult learners, that some of that which we do in a college experience may not be realized until the second act of life. And so there certainly is, we want to think about outcomes and where students will go based on their education and their immersive learning, that they would apply it towards X that they're studying. But it's deeper rooted than that, because we want to also leave that whole important aspect of reflection, because the journey isn't straight and we all face crossroads in life. And maybe because of a family situation, ill parent, or a financial situation, we're not able to take that turn right at that moment in time. But later on, we might be able to turn right because things have cleared up, things have been resolved in those other challenges that we face in life.
I love the kind of like the building in the reflection piece, because one thing I learned this year's National Student Experience Survey that I've had the pleasure and privilege to, analyze and talk about with a colleague in our white paper, the key finding was growth. Like the thing that students want is growth. And if they have a sense that they're growing, which we talked about as teamwork and challenge and confidence and impact, then they're happy with everything else. So if they feel like they're growing, they're happy with their classes, they're happy with the community, they're happy with the culture of the campus, they're even happy with technology and facilities. It's like the best indicator. Unfortunately, only 2/3 of students were happy with, their growth. But then you read all these stories about how much people feel like they got out of college in hindsight. I feel like one of the key takeaways for institutions is not only do you have to be focused on the stuff that helps students grow, but you have to help them realize that they're growing with that reflection. Because if you're just on the wheel, you may not realize like what you learned in class X and how it's helping you in class Y or internship Z and so forth.
And that's why, the whole aspect for me that's so important, I think it has been a part of my DNA really from the very early stages of my career. And this is more a little bit about the student affairs piece, but let me share it nonetheless, is we have an obligation as an institution to bring forward opportunities for engagement with faculty outside the classroom in intentional ways. And so if I look across my career at all 4 institutions I've worked at, I have brought and crossed the divide that some institutions call a divide, I don't, of bringing faculty into residence halls to live with students, living learning communities that are intentionally focused, that bring an adult presence in a way that's not curriculum-based, but is actually more informal. And to have that ability to be a role model and speak with a role model about how they made it through the journey. I do think there's another area that really could be and should be optimized more, is how do we do that with alums? I've tried it a couple of times and I'm still working on the exact formula for success, but I do think that's another series of folks. And then the third could certainly be partners, those organizations that are not formally aligned originally with an institution, but have services that they provide to an institution, and how do we bring the leadership or members of those organizations into the lives of our students?
I love that. So a key part of the student experience and how you enable student success is help facilitate these connections between students and different adults, not just in the classroom, but outside of it in more informal settings where maybe they're more approachable and you find a mentor, you find a role model, you build these relationships that are what college is all about. As you're thinking about helping students realize their potential, what's changing about the student experience in college that folks need to think about because it's going to change how they do their work?
There is so much that I could share, and I'll just try to pick a few. Certainly the diversifying nature of the students who are coming to campuses today certainly is one. I think the workforce that is diversifying as well with new and burgeoning careers that haven't even been created today that will be the future careers. I would say that, and this has been a long-standing one, though I think it's changed over time, is self-confidence for students. And certainly COVID played a role in probably slowing down some of the developmental experiences that students had in high school. I'd say communication is a challenge and certainly evolving, especially with social media. And the last one I'll just say is certainly the divide of perspectives and our inability as a society to work through those divides and to create a level of respect for conversation for our students in our campus. I'm teaching a first-year seminar, and I use Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And it's really been really helpful for these students to start to realize what they don't know and that it's okay. I think we press so hard for everyone to know everything, but that's impossible, right? So those are things that I think are
Yeah.
changes that are happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite a lot. It's like who students are, how to communicate with them, the confidence that they have, the way they can come together or not around an issue with respect and discussion and curiosity and so forth, and the jobs that they'll have that they need to be prepared for.
And I would say that, confidence and lack thereof certainly heightens in conversation or engagement, anxiety and other unintended outcomes from not feeling comfortable where you are. And then there's the whole mental health piece, which is even a little different than that, but certainly does get heightened when anxiety is high.
So you've got all these things changing as a result of those changes or those challenges. Like, what do you see as some of the most common kind of like pain points in the student journey, in the student experience?
I think sometimes having bureaucracy is certainly important for big organizations to have policies, procedures, ways of doing things, and even rituals that may have over time not been as appropriate for rituals on a campus or have changed. They're just not that kind of engaging thing. So
Sometimes those are tied to tradition.
absolutely. So I think that we have to be really thoughtful about how we approach these engagements for students. So, clearly it's important for us to be thinking about assessing and understanding students where they are, understanding an institution's strategic initiatives and what it is it wants to be, as that may morph. And it's challenging when you have most institutions are led by faculty who are here a long time. Students change every year and staff do as well. How do you get that campus conversation that really helps to frame who we are and what it is from a strategy standpoint we want to be? Those would be a couple of those.
So students are kind of battling bureaucracy and maybe some traditions and rituals that are outdated. And then sometimes there's a lack of understanding about the students themselves, like who they are, what their needs are, where they're at, or a lack of understanding about like the institution itself, like who we are, who do we want to be, what are our goals, what's our strategy? What about like the opposite of that? Like, what do you see as some of the most like memorable, remarkable, valuable experiences in college, the highlights?
There's a lot of those, and I'm happy to share. I think that co-creation is one of those key important aspects that make it certainly memorable for students to think that they are leaving a mark on their peers and the institution overall. So that would certainly be one of them. I think that not only the co-creation piece, but then making sure that the institution demonstrates the impact of that co-creation on the institution itself, but on the students as well, how the institution is impacted by those students. And I would say that really bringing together an organization that focuses on the student journey. And I think that's been why I feel like this institution has been successful is all student facing operations are all working under one umbrella now, right? Under the student experience. And I think sometimes the bifurcated nature of the administration causes internal battles that actually have a downward negative effect on how students experience to get things done. And a lot of organizations are created, higher ed and elsewhere, are created based on people sometimes, and not necessarily on what does the customer benefit from. And I've had lots of conversations with, those who run the one-stop operations across the country.
Right.
And how does that work? So that's one example, I think, of an administrative potential barrier. But, the student journey piece here is really thinking about the whole idea of entry to exit. And how do we get a group of leaders in those areas together around the table, having a shared approach and understanding of what are the impacts when we don't collectively work together with a shared vocabulary and a shared goal on supporting students and enhancing engagement with students.
So when institutions create things with their stakeholders, with their students, with their faculty, that creates a valuable experience that leads to highlights. And when they think about things holistically from entry to exit, that does as well. What are like 3 of your favorite initiatives or approaches or programs that are really like moving the needle on student experience, like either at Quinnipiac or across the country? What's really what's blowing you away?
I think that when I see students running businesses on college campuses, I think that's really truly impactful, right? That they have a level of ownership and they are the ones who then need to explain to their peers the service that they're providing and what are the barriers that they experience. And they, in many times, can have a closer affinity towards the institution because they're living some of the barriers that exist out there. So I think running businesses is a huge opportunity for institutions to do better. I think that having a formalized process to listen with solutions for students to provide about how they're experiencing things is certainly another way, an important way. Advisory boards and ways to formalize the conversation is really important. One of the things that we do here, just to give an example, is we have a program co-sponsored by this office and student government. It's called Talks on the Rocks. And once a month, we have a topical area where we invite 50 students for a free, pretty high scale buffet, surf and turf, et cetera. 10 faculty and 10 staff sit at small tables together and they're asked a series of questions. And then there's a sharing out process. And then those answers, depending on the topic, is given to the office who has responsibility for that and meets with the student government president to go through that. And I think, what it does is it starts to create a shared responsibility of the stakeholders, students, faculty, and staff, to reflect on a particular topic, whether it be wellness on campus. How do we build a stronger community on campus? How do we help with the transition for transfer students? I mean, any of those topics, right? And I think that for a 2-hour period of time, there's some pretty deep thinking that goes on with some really good suggestions as to how we can enhance community. I think the other last one I will share is how do we utilize technology? And, certainly with AI and all that it connotes, it is not our enemy, but how can we use it in a way that's going to better experience? There's some institutions that are doing some pretty interesting things. One colleague is, transforming delivery of food with robots going around campus and doing that on a pretty large scale. But it goes to deeper than that to, how do we bring it in the classroom? How do we help students? I'm in a committee right now leading for branding and really creating a program in a new residence hall we're building. So we all created mission statements. And then we fed all of our mission statements into ChatGPT and we got a mission statement and tried to see whether that was better than the ones we had sent in. So there's lots of ways to do it. But those are some of the, I think, interesting things that I see happening.
That's great. The student-run businesses is a great point. It's taking the real-world project or the internship or the co-op, to the next level where like the rubber really does meet the road. There's some really interesting programs out there, like Saxby's, for instance, is doing excellent work in that space. So in our last 5 or so minutes here, what advice do you have for other CXOs or people who feel like it's their job to mind the student experience on their campus and online and in between? What are the tactics? What are the tools that you think could help them?
You and I went on a brief journey speaking with XOs from other industries. And I think that could be really valuable. It certainly was for me in learning what healthcare, entertainment, museums, marketing, communications, what are they doing to engage their customers? So we always have to keep our eye on the learning and what could be transferable to higher education. I think another one certainly is what does really matter to students? And I've come to realize, maybe I've known it all my life, that it differs. Now, how does it differ? Developmentally, I think that the first-year students, there's a lot of similarities, not 100%, but there are things that kind of bubble up as first-year students, kind of what they want. Belonging, community, feeling like they're made the right choice and why, right? I think it changes a little bit, certainly for subpopulations, and you wrote a book on subpopulations. So there's differences among those populations. So knowing that, I really do believe regularized engagement for leaders in higher education is critically important. I often say that 30% of my time, 40% of my time is engaged with students. Many people will say, Tom, you're at this level. You work for the president, you're spending 30% of your time with students. I live in a residence hall with students. Who at my level does that? Many. But I think it makes a difference. I'm a sociologist of sorts, right? I see what's happening, when I go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning. I look around, I see the campus at night, I hear what's happening. I go to events. So all of those things. Utilizing data on issues is really important. Having a regularized kind of idea of how students are experiencing what you are actually trying to do. And then the last one I would say that's really important is telling the story, is being able to provide history. And that's why last institution I was there 19 years, I was able to do this really well. Why do we do this? Let's do this. We can do what you're asking us to do, but let me give you the history of how it evolved to be the way it is today. And not to stop conversation, but perspectives is something that we need to teach students who are here at a point in time. And that point in time is very short when you think about the history of an institution. And I don't want to be seen as just the historian, but I do think it's important for people to know why our dining runs the way it does, or why 15 credit hours is full-time.
Or the thing you're proposing, we tried, and here's why it didn't work, or here's what worked about, and here's what didn't.
And what can we learn from it and maybe try again, right? So those are some of the things that I certainly think have been advice moments. And finally, the person in front of you is the most important person at that moment in time. You cannot lose sight. I can't lose sight, especially where I have positional privilege, that it's hard for an entry-level staff member to meet with me. And so when they're sharing their concerns, that took a lot. Or a first-year student. So, I think being in the classroom is important. I teach a first-year seminar, and I think all administrators should be in the classroom teaching. Absolutely, without a doubt.
That's great advice. Well, what's been your biggest surprise about the student experience at QU? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, so something that surprises you, my guess, could be pretty interesting.
But there's a percentage of folks who are pretty quick to judge without all the data, and I find that mostly to be a small segment of parents. That's the hardest thing for any college administrator today, is how quick there's a small percentage who are ready to blame rather than seeking to understand. And it is interesting, the amount of time I put in with a particular parent after I can't believe you do it this way. I can't believe that this happened. And then we sit and talk. I usually get a thank you later on at some point in time. But the too strong a word, the damage that it does on social media to just quickly use the dagger,
Yeah.
to take that dagger out. And rarely does a parent who does that go back to the social media and say, I got more clarity. I'm sorry. And it's not just colleges, right? I mean, it's in the industry, but there is a small population that takes up a lot of space. And I just wish our society was a little bit more forgiving or seeking to understand before.
Or acting. Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much for this great overview of the student experience, your insights and your advice. It's going to help a lot of folks. And I'm looking forward to see how this chapter turns out.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.